Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's live stream. My name is Melissa Wilson. I'm a senior economist at CEDA, the Committee for Economic Development of Australia, and I'll be facilitating today's discussion about the future of work from home. We're dialing in from all corners of the country today, and indeed internationally as well. So let me begin by acknowledging that today, wherever in Australia you're participating from, of course, we are on Aboriginal land. I'm joining you from the lands of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains. So I'd like to pay my respects to Kaurna elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We're looking forward to an interesting conversation today, and we invite everyone on the call to actively participate in today's discussion. You can ask questions and you can also vote on your favourite questions via the Pigeonhole app. Access details for Pigeonhole will appear on the screen, or you can scroll down to the bottom of the live stream for access. Today's password for Pigeonhole is WFH productivity. WFH as in work from home, productivity, all one word. The shift to remote and hybrid work has been one of the most dramatic and enduring effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Rarely, if ever, have we seen such a profound shift to the way we work happen literally overnight. It is an emotive topic. Everyone has an opinion, an anecdote, or an experience to draw on in this space. And that's why rigorous analysis and evidence is so important if we want to make work from home work for us as individuals, as organisations, and for the broader economy. CEDA analysis has found that in Australia there are clear benefits to work from home for both employees and employers. Our analysis has found that workers are willing to accept lower wages in return for the flexibility to work from home. In fact, people in Australia who regularly work from home currently earn 5.8% less than their fully in-office peers. In research to be published tomorrow, we quantify the impact of work from homes in terms of reduced commute times, increased hours worked, and increased labour force participation for remote and hybrid workers. And we've also identified significant benefits to cohorts of workers who were previously limited in how they were able to engage with the workforce, particularly mothers of small children, carers, and people with a health condition or a disability that affects their ability to work. So today I'm looking forward to unpacking the international evidence on work from home with our speakers. We are privileged to have with us an undisputed global leader and expert in this space, Professor Nicholas Bloom from Stanford University. Welcome, Professor Bloom. And also Ming Long, speaking with her non-executive director hat on today. Ming is a non-executive director of CEDA. She's also chair of CSIRO and a director of IFM Investors, QBE Insurance and Telstra. Welcome, Ming. So today we're going to start with a presentation from Professor Bloom on the international state of play in terms of work from home, and then we'll follow that with a Q&A discussion with both of our panelists. Professor Bloom, over to you.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much. So what do you pull up my slides, actually? I'm going to, exactly as Melissa said, I'm going to be very data focused. So I want to talk about the future of working from home or work from home. So you probably, I'm going to basically focus on data for the start. Where are we? I'll show you that there's a lot of myth and, fact and fiction seem to overlap here. Then some suggestions on managing hybrid and remote. So in particular, kind of two key things from this. And then finally, I talk a bit about the future. So looking a year ahead and then looking maybe 5 years ahead. So firstly is, this is a huge topic. You kind of get the sense from following the media that work from home is all over. So, New York Times wrote up that Zoom, the portal we're using right now, was apparently cancelling work from home in September 2023. That was a bit of an overstatement. I actually know Eric Yuan. I've been to Zoom a couple of times, and they are on hybrid. So they have sales folks come in Monday, Wednesday, engineering Tuesday, Thursday, and no one comes in at all on Friday. But that was not how it was represented in the media. Amazon was a big shock. So Amazon really was, the tsunami that hit the work from home world. September 2024, they announced at the beginning of this year, 25, they were canceling work from home. They've kind of got halfway there. As I don't know if you're following the media, there's stories of, offices, there's no desks, car parks fall a bit of a mess. I know people in Amazon, they're in more than they were before, but there's certainly still a lot of people working from home. And then obviously Trump, Musk tried to ban it in the federal government in the US. And I know with Albanese and Dutton, you have this, back and forth going on. And I think work from home, at least hybrid, seems to have kind of won the day. So stepping aside from media and news headlines, what's the data? I'm going to start showing you 3 slides from the US, then I'll show you some Australian data and then kind of step out globally. So let's just start with the US. I mean, by the way, I live here, but I live in America. You can hear from my accent that I was born in the UK originally, so I don't really know where exactly is home. But here is US data. This on the y-axis is share of full paid days work from home. So why that metric? Because by now most people, most listeners, I think if you work from home, you're probably hybrid. Hybrids become quite common. Fully remote is actually relatively rare now in 2025. So, I mean, it's there. It's about 10% of employees, but hybrids about 30%. So we want to look at full paid days. What you can see is pre-pandemic is about 7%. There was not much work from home globally, to be quite honest, before the pandemic. If you look in 2020, there was the lockdowns, it surged, it dropped back down. Key thing to notice for me is from about January, February, March, it's kind of been stable in 2023. So the last couple of years, despite all the media headlines about work from home is over, the return to office in full swing, we haven't actually in survey data see any return to the office in the US. The blue is our own data. We're surveying 10,000 Americans a month. The red is the census. It's 40,000. They show a similar story. So, on survey data, what people claim they do, we're not seeing any return to the office. Maybe you don't trust surveys. So here's a different way to look at it. This is office swipe data. So how many folks are swiping into office buildings every day? This is data from Castle. They have 2,600 office buildings. And this shows basically the same story. So yes, offices were totally empty in March 2020. I mean, who was going in? You see it's about 15%, 10, 15%. It rises until we hit about 50% fill rates in the spring of 2023. And then it's been kind of flat. There's a bit of a rise, but it's not much. And bear in mind, empty offices tend to get closed. So this index has a bit of a natural bias to head upwards. So this again shows it's basically pretty flat. So say you don't trust, surveys or office swipe data, there's yet another data source, which is tracking cell phones or mobile phones. So, thankfully, basically nowadays, no one's more than 6 foot from their phone. I'm sure pretty much everyone listening has it in their pocket or on their desk. So if you can track a phone, you can track a person. And Placer AI tracks phones. It tracks, millions of phones, and it tracks phone fall into 700 office buildings across the US. And it really is showing a very similar story as the swipe data. Again, footfall into office buildings collapsed. It recovered, but from spring 2023 onwards, it's been flat. So, that's the story for North America. What do we see in Australia? So the Australian data looks, similar. This is a measure of folks that are working from home 1+ day a week. It's a slightly different measure, but I actually prefer it. Obviously, there is more intense working from home in 2020, but the number of folks that are working from home 1 or more day a week has actually been very stable over the last few years. And again, from what I've heard, and I'll come on to some other data sources, Australia seems to be, and in fact, the UK I know well, following a similar pattern. Yes, there's a lot of, during the lockdown, and things have been stable for the last couple of years. So why is this? The reason is basically it's hugely profitable for companies. So why is hybrid won? Why is hybrid won out? Why have all these bosses trying to force through a 5-day return to the office being frustrated? And they're actually pretty rare. There's Jamie Dimon, Elon Musk. I can probably David Solomon maybe, although I spoke to David Solomon, it's not clear exactly what, you run out of fingers on one hand and you've got the CEOs that are forcing people back in 5 days a week. Why is 80% of Fortune 500 companies focused on hybrid for managers and professionals? Well, this is a paper that really kind of shows why. So it's a paper in Nature from last summer. I wrote it with 2 other people, Robin Han and James Liang. James was my graduate student in Stanford about 15 years ago, and he's the chairman of a massive company called Trip.com. So the CEO, Jane's son, James, and Jane agreed with us to run a big randomized control trial, A/B test. So what we do is we took 1,600 engineers, marketers, finance professionals, and computer engineers, and we randomized on even and odd birthdays, whether they came in the office 5 days a week or they came in 3 days a week and worked from home too. And so this is much like tech firms are endlessly doing A/B tests. We want to do an A/B test on work from home. And we ran this for 6 months, and then we collected another 18 months worth of data. So what did we find? So we found 2 things. Finding one, there was no impact on performance. So we looked at leadership scores, innovation scores, performance reviews, performance grades, promotions, lines of code written for the computer engineers. We had enormous amounts of data for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months. We just saw nothing. So there was, when you're looking at 1,600 people, you have pretty accurate data. We just saw no effect. And the reason is when I interviewed folks, they would say, there is totally a value to coming into the office. It's really useful. You get mentored. It's good for innovation. It's good for building culture. But by the time you've come in for 3 days a week on the same 3 days, it's not obvious that days 4 and 5 are, in addition, that actually helpful. And they'll say, look, you have to remember, on the days I get to work from home, one is I don't have to commute, saves me a lot of time, better slept, more refreshed. And secondly, it's quieter. So when I'm at home, I can kind of concentrate. And so it looks like, it's not clear what the optimal number of days in the office is, but it probably is not 5. For productivity maximization, it looks like maybe 3, maybe 4 days a week. There's no exact science on this. It's helpful. Why? Because those days a week at home each week actually are helpful for concentration. So fact 1, there's at least for 3 days, there was no effect on performance. Fact 2 is that quit rates fell by 35%. Why was that? Employees basically like getting to work from home 2 days a week. The company, Trip.com, said, look, every person that quits costs us about $50,000 because we've got to go out, re-advertise, re-interview, retrain, re-get up to speed. They said it's a hugely expensive process that costs HR. It takes current managers off business into interviewing, into training. And so they looked at these numbers and they said, hybrid is phenomenally profitable. They reckon it was saving the business, increasing profits by about $20 million a year. And so this is basically why it's stuck. In a capitalist economy, what makes businesses money tends to stick around. And so if anyone's out there trying to persuade your CEO to go for hybrid, the best bet on this is it's profitable. It's very profitable. And this is really why it's stuck around. So going to kind of cross-country data, we just put out, in fact, it was covered in The Economist this week. So if you get the Economist, I think there's a piece in the finance section. So this is hot off the press. We were surveyed around the world. We've been doing these annual surveys. We did one at the end of 24, beginning of 2025. If you look, Australia is actually right at the top. It turns out Australia looks pretty similar to other English-speaking countries. The work from home rates amongst graduates is a reasonably high. It's 1 to 2 days a week. Europe's a little lower. Kind of Latin America, to the extent we can survey Africa, is a little lower, and Asia's the lowest yet. So what you tend to see is in English-speaking countries, work from home levels are a bit higher. Bosses are a bit more relaxed. Fully remote is not very common, but hybrid is very common. We've actually been running this survey for 3 years now. And what you can see is the average number of work from home days did drop from 22 to 23. But when you look to 24, 25, it's stabilized. So, the big picture I want to tell you is, 1, work from home is kind of stabilized. There has not been a return to the office. Don't believe the media. I know why those stories are there. They're there because people get excited. They click on them. They get angry. They send them around on social media. That's the reason they're written, but they don't actually reflect the big data. And number 2, the reason it's there is hybrid has turned out to be very profitable for firms. Finally, I get asked a lot about industry variations. Yes, there are enormous industry variations. So finance, insurance, information, tech, business services, lawyers, accountants, they tend to have very high levels of work from home. Why? Because you're on your computer and you're doing, you don't really need materials. You're not dealing directly typically with customers or equipment. At the other end, hospitality, food, retail, they tend to have much lower levels. So given all of that, what are some thoughts on managing this? By now, I've probably spoken to, 1,000 plus managers, employees, organizations. A couple of things come out. And so I'll just go through the 2 key stylized results that come out. So before I do that, just to, this is it's like group therapy. This is hard. This is really hard. So everyone says, this is so difficult. And the reason it's so difficult is employees all want different things. So we survey people, we ask, look, how many days do you want to work from home? About 20% of people just say never. They never want to work from home. They're typically kind of the same age as my kids. My oldest kids are 19 and 21. I serve them at undergrads a lot. They'll say, look, I want to go into the office. It's social. I want to get mentored. And where am I going to be? My apartment or my flat? How am I going to, I'm sharing it with 4 other people. There's nowhere to work at home. So that's one end. Then the other extreme, there's 30% of people that want to work from home 5 days a week. when you interview them, they're typically in their 30s or 40s. They may have young kids. They say, look, I have a great, lively, great social life out of work. I'm moved up mentoring. I'm up the career profile. I don't want to go in. I can do my job great at home and occasionally go in. And then there's about 50% in the middle. And that will be, like me. And I kind of like going in and out. So fact one, it's kind of like the office air conditioning. Some people want it hot, some want it cold. There is no one size fits all. So what would I suggest doing? So first thing is coordination. So this is surveys asking on the left, why do you like working from home? And on the right, why do you like going into the business premises? So on the left, that's kind of obvious. Why do people say they like working from home? Why do they typically, the average person wants to work from home about 2.5 days a week. Why is that? Number one's no commute. You save on, save on gas, save on lunch, it's more flexible. So that's kind of not that surprising. On the right, why is it that people are still on average actually wanting to go in 2-3 days a week? It's because they want to socialize or they want to collaborate face to face with coworkers. Notice that's high. Notice FaceTime with my manager is right at the bottom. Quiet is at the very bottom. We actually had a category which is like the free pizza, free coffee, the bagel. It's not even on there. So like nobody is commuting for 45 minutes to an hour in both directions for a free pizza. It doesn't cut it. Why people want to come in is they want to see their coworkers socialize, connect together. That means the kind of obvious so what about that is you want to coordinate. Now, what level to coordinate is less clear. There are some companies like Disney that just say, look, or Apple early on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, or Trip. They just coordinate at the company level. There are others where it makes more sense to do it by office, by group. So for me, for example, in Stanford, it makes total sense to coordinate with the rest of the economics department because I see them and work with them. It really doesn't make much sense for me to coordinate with the English department because I don't really overlap with them. So for us, group by group coordinates, but whatever it is, whoever you work with, socialize or in with, it makes sense to coordinate. So that's kind of finding one. I would say I would kind of get tougher than maybe we were in 22, 21 on enforcing and monitoring this. So, I would probably start, you want to coordinate. The reason I highlight this is there's a bit of a public good here. So imagine, Ming, Melissa, and me, and let's, I don't know, 2 other people, John and Jane are in a team of 5. If I stay home and the other 4 folks come in, if we want a group meeting, suddenly everyone else is going to get on Zoom to connect me in. And it's kind of annoying because you've come into the office and now you're back on Zoom and often people go to their own desk to do it. So there is some public good. And it means one thing is I think it makes sense. And I'm seeing increasing firms are doing this is they're measuring the swipe data with Wi-Fi logins. They're making allowances for travel, but you record it. So if I'm not in the office and I'm out traveling to meet customers or for conferences, that counts as an in-office day, but you need to record it. Second thing is they're spreading out. It's pretty standard increasingly just to share this out with managers, maybe monthly. And the final thing is it's important just to have sensible plans. So there's an old law, which is, there's an old saying, there's a Roman saying, which is a good law is an easy to enforce law. And I'll give you an anecdote. There are 2 organizations, both big organizations in Washington, D.C. One of them, the IMF, said folks are going to come in 2 days, Tuesday, Thursday. And they kind of enforced it, were tough and that. People came in Tuesday, Thursday. They were happy. They said, everyone's around. It's kind of buzzing. It makes sense to do it. There's another organization, the World Bank, that for a while was saying, look, we want you in 4 days a week, but we're not going to say which days. And you can kind of guess what happened. So people kind of came in on some days, they didn't come on others. When he spoke to people, they're saying it's when I'm in, half the people aren't there, the other half are missing. So people on average were still coming in 2 days, but they were a mess and they're all over the week and it just didn't really work out. So I would take a sensible plan, maybe 3 days in the office, coordinate on fixed days, and then kind of enforce on that. One of the reasons I often tell folks is, look, if your hybrid plan's a mess, there's always the risk that the CEO says, look, it ain't working. Let's get you in 5 days a week. That was apparently one of the motivations for Amazon. They looked at the swipe data. They were supposed to be in 3. They saw it was 2.5 or, 1.5 or 2. And the CEO, Andrew Jassy, said, look, we want 3 to 4. Let's ask for 5. It's kind of like, looking after 10-year-olds. You kind of shoot for something higher. So, I would kind of set a sensible plan and then stick to it. The other, secondly is on performance reviews. So, this has come up over and over again. So the story is, imagine Ming is my boss and we're in the office together. We're in the office every day. She can see I'm at my desk typing away. Am I working? When she walks past my screen, she looks at it. Am I, is it Python or Excel or Word up, or am I watching Champions League or Netflix? It's pretty easy to tell if I'm actually working. The problem is if I'm at home, Ming has no way of knowing if I'm actually working. And so in the office, when you're face to face, you can measure inputs and kind of, I guess traditionally the British say bums in seats type thing. There are people there at the desk working. As soon as you're working from home, there's no way to do that. And you have to focus on output. And actually, first time I heard about this interview, Marissa Mayer, who's the CEO of Yahoo, and told me about this was, the incident that happened in Yahoo back in 2013. And so the whole idea here is if Ming is managing me, he said to me, Nick, look, I want you, here are your objectives. For me, it might be teaching, research, university service, various list of things. I'm going to evaluate you on them. As long as you get that done and you come in on the days you're supposed to be in, I'm totally relaxed with how you manage your work from home time. For her, it means she doesn't have to be breathing down my neck and just make sure I get my job done. For me, it's also a lot better because if I want to go pick my kid up from school or go to the dentist, I can do that without fear that Ming's saying, why haven't I replied to my email, for the last 30 minutes? So finally, where are we heading? What's the future look like? So I have some other hot off the press survey data. Again, I'm afraid this is US firms, but it's probably pretty true globally. So back in February 2025, so not that long ago, we surveyed over 400 firms right across the US. This is joint with the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. So it's a pretty big national survey in conjunction with the Federal Reserve System. And we asked companies what their RTO plans are. So he said, during the next 12 months, is your firm planning a return to office mandate for those employees who currently work in hybrid or fully remote arrangements? And what we've plotted here is what their current work from home shares are and what it would be under a return to office mandate. And you may be thinking we made a mistake, but they're basically the same numbers. There's like no difference. So you're like, okay, so currently, as in February 2025, remember that was after Trump and Musk had made their big push. And this is very recent data. So there is seemingly no difference between what's currently happening and firms looking a year ahead. Why is that? Well, the big reason is, yes, there are some firms that are reducing work from home. So definitely there are companies having aggressive RTOs pushing people back in. Turns out there are just as many that are doing the reverse, that are saying our office lease, we signed our lease in 2017. It's now 8 years later, it's expired. We're not locked into this building, so we've decided to have more hybrid, and some people have gone fully remote. And this is a graph of the change, and most firms aren't doing anything. Yes, there are some firms increasing work from home, and yes, there are some firms reducing, but on average, it's stable. So this is kind of, where we are now and where we've been for the last 2 years. The reason it seems like everyone's RTOing is the media only picks up on this, guys, because they make great stories that people madly click on, comment, and get really angry. And no one ever reports these guys, but they're out there just as much. So then a bigger question, based on, as you can guess, inspired, well, not totally inspired by, but very, very topical now, what's happening in the US is what happens is the recession. So, as you can see, the stock market's all over the place. There is definitely an increasing risk of a recession. The IMF put the US risk of recession at close to 50%. So I asked this question, what firms would do if the unemployment rate were to double? That's basically, a kind of garden variety, nasty recession. And what we saw is, yes, firms do predict a little bit more in office, a little bit less work from home, but it's not massive. The difference is really very marginal. Why is that? Well, the big reason is basically in a recession, firms still want to control costs. They're worried about office costs. They're worried about recruitment and retention. It's often cheaper to hire people on hybrid because you can go to larger labor markets. When you interview managers, sure, some firms are saying it's the recession are hauling them back in there, but others are saying, we need to cut costs and it becomes more brutal. Therefore, we're going to move to a more hybrid or remote world. So I don't think for the next year or two, even if there's a global recession, things are changing very much. Finally, let's pan out to the long run. Oh yeah, I was about to say, I posted this on LinkedIn the last week, and it's been crazy. I'd say most of LinkedIn agreed. It's been very entertaining reading some of the comments. Not everyone agrees. I'd have to say it seems to be correlated with the amount of maybe office real estate they're trying to sell, but there's a big debate on it. So let's look long run. In order to predict long run, I want to show you some data from history and then say why that's a good predictor for long run. So for the US, we have data on work from home levels back to 1965. And we spliced various surveys together. There's some dotted lines because you don't have data on every year. There's a bit of, but you can basically see this is a log scale, by the way. So growth rates are a straight line. What you can see, there's a pretty constant growth rate in work from home over about 50 years running up before the pandemic. It was doubling roughly every 15 years. Why is that? Well, the answer is relatively clear. It's better technology. So, for example, I'm 51. I grew up in the UK. I'm one of 4 kids. Both my parents work full time. And in the 80s, when I was a kid, sometimes they'd have to work from home because someone was sick or London Underground would bust or the car would break down. And I've interviewed, I talked to my parents and particularly my mum about this, and she'd say, it was terrible working from home when we had to stay at home to look after your kids was terrible. It's like carrying large piles of paper. There were no personal computers and you were phoning in on really expensive phone calls into the office. You were basically completely left behind. She said it was dreadful. And she said, look, in the 90s, we got this Amstrad computer, this green screen thing, and it made life dramatically better at home. 2000s, the internet comes along. 2010, about cloud, so you can share documents easily, video calls. So basically, technology is getting better and better and better. If we are therefore to predict out 10 years out, it's pretty clear that technology is going to be getting a lot better in the next 5, 10 years. So I'm out in Silicon Valley. And I've spoken to multiple companies, one that has a kind of 12 by 12 foot portal, another one that's trying to generate kind of Jedi Council type holograms. As at Google, they have this thing called Starliner, which is an incredible 3D thing. So, it's not coming out right now, but certainly if you look 5 to 10 years, it's going to be better. We're not going to all be fully remote in the metaverse, but it's going to mean at the margin, maybe rather than go in 3 and work from home 2, we'll go in 2 and work from home 3. So to end, work from home is clearly here to stay. Capitalism in a sense is won. It's profitable for firms, and that's ended up winning the day. It's mostly for managing professionals. It's not really common for frontline staff, but managing it is hard. And I think the 2 big things I've picked up on is coordination. So make sure that folks are in on the same day, which needs some kind of central organization, a bit of monitoring, to be honest. And secondly, a performance focus. And with that, I'll stop and go to what Ming and Melissa have to say.
Thank you so much for those really, really useful insights and very data driven as well, which is really, really helpful for our audience. Over to you now in the audience. We're going to jump into our Q&A discussion. As I said, we're very keen to hear your questions, so get those into Pigeonhole now. We might not get through them all, but we'll definitely try our best. And in the meantime, I might start off with a couple of questions myself. Professor Bloom, if I can start with you. So as you touched on, we're in the middle of an election campaign here in Australia, and work from home has become quite political and hit the headlines during this campaign, with the federal opposition recently abandoning its pre-election promise to force public servants back into the office full time. Can you talk to the international evidence on work from home for the public sector specifically? Are there any sort of any special reasons why a public sector might be a little bit different to the private sector in this space?
Not radically. Oh, before I forget, I'm happy to share the slides. I think Melissa, you mentioned, and Mercedes, you kindly share them if anyone wants.
Yeah, we will. Yeah, absolutely.
So on the one hand, the public sector tends to be pretty educated. If you look at folks that work, I worked actually in the UK civil service for a bit, so did my mum. If you look at it, it tends to be a lot of graduates on computers. So in that sense, it lends itself. It looks a lot like professional services, lawyers, accountants, those kind of folks. The only thing I worry a bit about, so, that means work from home is very natural in the public sector context. The only thing I worry about is you do need reasonable performance reviews. So, I worked in the UK public sector. I worked in the Treasury and actually had an internship in the Department for Industry. They did not always have the best performance evaluation systems. It was, one of these things where everyone was getting a 5 out of 5. So that makes it slightly trickier. But, as a role, it very naturally lends itself. The main thing is to make sure there's ways to evaluate performance, have kind of objectives. But I've been following the Australian political context, and I was very happy to see what happened. I mean, if only it would be, on the same path in the US. To note, in the US, obviously Musk and Trump are heavily against work from home. The big driver of that is, quite honestly, hoping people will quit. It's kind of why Amazon banned it in September 2024. Amazon had too many employees, they'd overhired, they wanted to downsize. In Jassy's memo, he explicitly talked about wanting to be smaller, get rid of managers. So both Amazon and the UK federal government have really been against it. for completely different reasons. It's not really an efficiency or cost thing. It's about hoping people are honestly going to get upset and leave.
Thank you. Ming, if I can bring you in, you've thought a bit about work from home in the context of building the operational resilience of organisations. And Nick touched on that when he said, for example, if the trains are not running one day, we all have to suddenly switch, and technology is making that easier. And we know that we're going to be facing inevitable disruptions from climate, pandemic, all sorts of other things. Can you expand on your thoughts around that for us?
Yeah, it's interesting. Certainly, wearing my board hat, I would say all of my boards, we work hybrid. There are days when we have board meetings where it's actually better to be in the office. We see people, I can eyeball people, we do that. But then a lot of our committee meetings are hybrid, and inevitably someone can't make whatever it is, and there is some sort of hybrid meeting, especially for sort of committee meetings and even for board meetings, but less so, because as Nick said, when we're all in the room together, let's all get in the room together, unless there's a good reason for why you're not there. So I'd say that the culture from the top, from a board perspective, it's working hybrid, okay? And so when I think about the organisations I am on the board of, what I'm always thinking of 5 years ahead, we've got more climate disruption, we've potentially got more social disruption, we could have more health disruption events in the community. I want to make sure that our organisations are resilient, which means actually, if you are always just working in the office, oh my God, what's going to happen if you haven't got the muscle of people also being able to work from home? So I want to have that level of resilience in the organisation to adapt to whatever catastrophe or whatever thing is going to disrupt the organisation. So that muscle needs to exist, and it needs to exist well into the future. That also means as a culture in the organisation, and this is probably the most important thing, that when Nick's talking about leadership needs to change in terms of how it's assessing people, how we think about ways of working needs to change. I am really talking about a culture in an organisation that can adapt to any change that can come. And it's a culture that means that when that disruption comes, we move really quickly. We're agile. People aren't, oh my God, scared, what am I going to do? I've now got to set my home office up. Oh, geez, how am I going to do that? So I want that culture to exist in the organisation, leadership all the way down, that we can change how we work really quickly, because you never know what's going to happen, like COVID #2.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ming. We'll bring in some of our audience questions now, and the top voted question at the moment from Andrew Weir is around the implications for our cities. So Andrew says, have we seen any evidence that work from home has changed settlement patterns? What are the implications for our cities? Nick, do you want to take that question?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, for sure. And it has changed. I actually had a paper I put out in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences where we looked partly at US and actually partly global data. So in the US, we looked at Zillow and census data, and globally we had MasterCard data on where people are spending money, including for Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane. We picked like 200 global cities. So what you see for sure, one thing you see is people moved out of city centres into the suburbs, which is not that surprising. But, I'm working for Ming and I've only come in 3 days a week. I maybe actually want a home office, and I also don't care so much that I have a bit of a longer commute. So people have moved out. Spending has moved out. I actually talked to the board of Panera Bread, who, I don't know, do you have Panera in Australia? They're like Pret a Manger. They're basically a bread sandwich chain, and they were saying, like demand is down in the city centre, but it's way up in the suburbs. And they were saying actually office catering demand is down on Monday and Fridays, but it's really up on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, because people are trying to bribe folks to come in. There's been traffic has interestingly changed. Traffic patterns are better. Another thing we're seeing is that if coming back to Ming's resilience, actually, if take me on the West Coast. So because of where I live in California, I end up with a lot of very early meetings because I'm trying to talk to East Coast folks, or particularly Europeans. If I'm working in tech and I have a 7 a.m. meeting and an 8 a.m. meeting, my boss is basically typically fine and says, Nick, just do it on Zoom, come in after. So there's a lot of folks that are taking meetings in the morning or leaving early to take, in Australia, you probably have the reverse time zone with the US where you have a bunch of things late. And so we're seeing traffic is spreading out. I mean, finally, the weirdest I mean, there's two others I'll briefly mention. One is we've seen a huge surge of leisure. So I have some data on golf. I don't actually play golf, but the number of people asking me about golf playing's exploded because people are basically working from home and playing a bit of golf maybe during the day. I mention that because it's part of the so what for performance evaluation. So I'm working for Ming, as long as she knows that I'm getting my job done, there's actually nothing wrong with me playing golf for an hour and a half on a Tuesday morning, as long as I make up for it on Tuesday evening. So there are enormous changes. I think they mostly come to an end. I think most of these changes happened in 2021, 22, 23. So, where we are now looks like, where we're going to be for the next kind of 5-10 years, I think.
Can I just add one thing, Melissa, because it's sort of maybe not even, because I think there was an opportunity to be able to enable work to be done, say, in regional areas of Australia so that they could actually participate in growth more than they had done in the past. And my hope was that we could have more jobs in those areas. You could actually shift that wealth away from urban cities into the regional areas, which would have been fantastic. But when I think about the cost of living in our cities at the moment, and particularly cost of housing, we've got a huge cohort of people that have to live quite far away from the major sort of city centres, and it's the commute time is 1 to 2 hours sometimes a day, sometimes double that. We have to do sort of both ways. And what I found interesting is that the decision makers, which are the CEOs around this, particularly in Sydney, they live within 15 to half an hour of the office. They mostly have a ferry ride. It's a lovely commute. And they're making decisions about going back to offices where it's very reasonable for them to undertake that commute. I did make a very cheeky suggestion to a CEO that had suggested people come back to the office, that we should move the office to something more central in the city, which would have been, say, Parramatta, which meant that his commute time was going to increase to maybe 45 minutes, and there was dead silence at that point. So I would just say that there is just that we need to be really careful that the decision makers, and I put myself in one of them, it is very easy for us to sort of ask people to come back and force them to come back because our commute's easy. But for a lot of our people, it is not that simple. And, would I rather have it more difficult for me and the CEO, or have it easier for the vast majority of our people who I actually need to make sure they are really productive?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good point, Ming. And, the work that we're going to be publishing tomorrow says that, look, for the average Australian worker, they're probably saving about, the average Australian worker who works from home regularly is probably saving, 2 hours on commute time each week. So that is a significant amount of commuting. I might go to the next top voted question at the moment, which is around the impact of work from home with the right to disconnect. So, Nick, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this legislation that's been implemented in Australia around the right to disconnect. Ming, you will obviously be very familiar with it with your background. Did you want to start on that one?
You want me to start?
Yeah, go for it.
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
It's been interesting because we saw the right to disconnect sort of legislation all came out, and I thought, okay, this might be problematic. I'm not sure. It pretty much did nothing. Nothing has come to the board that we kept an eye on it. Obviously, there's a lot more work, not so much on the right to disconnect, albeit that we recognise people have that right, around mental health and making sure people actually have time away from work. It's more of that. So the more well-being approach to our employees rather than a legislative, hey, you must turn off now. Now, I'm sure for some organisations it could be problematic, but honestly, for my organisations I'm on the board of, there's not even a single blip or a sound bite that this is a problem for Australian organisations.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think this legislation, is a lot of people are kind of doing this already. A lot of organisations are doing this already. So in some ways, it's a bit of a solution in search of a problem, but we haven't seen a huge impact from that either. There's still a lot of interest in the chat on the impact on cities and the impact on offices. So I might combine a few questions here. So our audience are really interested in, and we've touched on a little bit of this, does hybrid work change the location decision for corporate headquarters, and what are the implications for agglomeration effects in sort of city economies, and long term, the impact of hybrid work models on those inner city economies and real estate, local businesses, and where that economic activity is taking place. Nick, I might hand over to you for that one.
Sure. So I think on the location of headquarters, the view by 2025 is not really. So in the peak of the pandemic is interesting. So I remember back in, May, June, July 2020, there was a lot of discussion of kind of, would companies just leave city centers, go out to the suburbs? Turns out, if you, I don't know, Goliath National Bank to, make up, if everyone's seen that show, How I Met My Mother, that's the fictional big evil corporation. If you're Goliath National Bank and you're in the center of, I don't know, Sydney, your employees are in the suburbs, or Melbourne, your employees are in the suburbs all around. So kind of like, as Ming said, if you move out to, one suburb, suddenly some folks are nearby, but many of them have now got to move a long way away. And the whole idea with hybrid is, when you're in 3 days a week, they're supposed to be nice for people to come in and not for some 2-hour slog to some up the opposite city. So companies have not really left city centers. What we've seen, though, is on average, I've some other research showing that employees are now living much further away. So coming back to Ming's point earlier, if I do work for Goliath National Bank, I used to have to come in 5 days a week. I'd live 45 minutes and away, and maybe I've got to have an expensive apartment in some suburb. Now what we're seeing is, if people are only coming in 3 days, the average person lives almost twice as far as they did pre-pandemic. So people are now, like, you're seeing this horror commutes of an hour and a half, but folks are choosing it. And the reason they're choosing it is their total weekly commute's about constant, but they get much more space and it's much more affordable. And coming back to Melissa, both your comment and Ming's comment, as a pitch to companies, this is profitable for them to do it. And so I often get asked, what's the productivity impact of working from home? And I'm like, that is the wrong question. The right question is the profitability impact, because imagine you now let your employees work from home 2 days a week. They may be no more or no less productive, but if their quit rates fall by a third, that's saving your business an enormous amount of money. And in fact, more generally, what you often see is you can get better people for the money, because now if you're hiring folks that may be 2 hours from central Melbourne because you let them come in for only 2 days a week, you're going to get just much higher qualified, better quality applicants. I mean, to give you, I'll give you one example, one extreme version of this. I spoke to a guy that ran a chain of taco restaurants in Los Angeles, and he came up to me after some event and said, I love working from home. And I was like, this is really weird. Like, I was a bit surprised, buzzard. And he said, well, look, everyone that comes in to serve food, to cook food, to clean in the restaurants, they've got to come in every day. He said, but my back office, those folks, I've sent them fully remote. And he said they're probably 80 or 90% as efficient, because there's some things that are easier to do in person. But he said it's about 50% the cost. And he said, I'm really happy because I'm getting, better people. I don't have to pay for offices. It's enormously cost effective and very profitable for the business. So ultimately, coming back to your comment and Ming's, it's like, if employees are happy, they tend to stick around more. That reduces turnover costs. That makes the business ultimately more successful.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that has been a little bit underappreciated in this conversation, more broadly around work from home. So I'm glad that you raised that. And along that vein, there's a few questions here about, well, why don't we go further? What about 100% remote? A few people have said, well, we've got a team spread across the country and we're very effective working like that, and we get a broader talent pool, you get better matches. Can you elaborate on your views on 100% remote?
Yeah, look, it definitely works in some circumstances. It depends on the nature of the job. So I have a few papers, randomized control trials. I have one that we're about to put out that's looking in Turkey, actually. That's a call center, so it's a somewhat unusual situation, but they are about 10% more productive when they're remote versus in the office. And the reason is it's so noisy in the office. And secondly, they get better quality employees. You actually see they have more graduates, more older experienced workers, more married women working. And there's a number of very clearly positive things. So for that company, and in fact, the entire industry, they've gone to fully remote. I'm involved in some startups in the Bay Area, and they are typically looking at hiring 30 somethings that are pretty experienced. They have equity in the business, and they're similarly fully remote. So I don't want to say there's one size fits all. I'll end with one final number for Stanford. We have 20,000 employees, so a massive organization. 10,000 come in every day. So they are cleaning, food service, security, transport, nurses, etc. There's a bunch of people who have to come in every day. There's about 8,000 that are hybrid, which would be me, much of the academics, a lot of the staff, senior managers. Then there's 2,000 people that are fully remote. And for example, the person that deals with my grants, some call centers, we have some of the coders, they're fully remote. And the university's view is we just get better people for our money. So if we hire someone in Mississippi for the, whatever we pay them, they're much better. So typically large organizations have a mix of all three, actually.
So do you think you're going to see people selecting across industries in terms of their preferences around this? If there are industries or jobs that can be done more from home and you have workers with a strong preference, do you think you're going to see, people selecting for that reason?
Yeah, totally. I'm sure it's already happened a lot. Yeah, absolutely. It's a big amenity value. So the numbers are, I give you another number. When you survey folks, they say they value hybrid about the same as an 8% pay increase. But there's a big spread. So there are some people who value hybrid, and particularly remote, the same as almost 20% more pay. So, if that's me, I will, basically, in another way, you can get a better, you can get someone 20% cheaper if you let them work remote for the same skills as in person. And typically the productivity gap is nowhere like this. So yes, absolutely. And that's, I think one of the, when I advise firms, the other things I say is whatever you do, be consistent. So take Apple. Apple has 150,000 employees, and Tim Cook inherited 150,000 employees in 2020, of which we know from the survey, some 20% wanted to come in every day, 30% wanted to never come in at all. And so whatever he did, there were people, thousands, tens of thousands of people really upset and angry with him. As long as Apple is consistent over time, and if they say we're going to be hybrid, over time, people that like hybrid stick and join the firm. People that want to be fully remote go to Airbnb, that people want to be fully in person eventually slowly drift over to, JP Morgan. So yes, choice is important. And one way you do it as a firm is to be consistent and say, this is our policy, stick with it. And then employees will sort in and sort out. And so in the long run, we're all actually better off. I'd love to hear what Ming thinks on this as well.
Oh, God, absolutely. Absolutely agree. So I'll give you some examples. We've got within Telstra, we are fully flexible. Work is what you do, not where you are. There are teams that are completely agile all over Australia. There's no point in trying to force them into an office building. They work remotely because they have to, because their teams are spread all over the country. We've got people in call centres that are in regional areas because they're in the community they're working with. So we have certain, circumstances where we can follow the sun, where we've got, sort of coverage over, the whole continent of Australia, just because there are people not just in urban areas, they're just, spread across the cities. We've got, on the insurance board, where we've got, people working in insurance in regional areas where, they're working with their customers. And so you have that better customer outcome. I can talk about my two kids. They've got people, one of them has an office in the city, may go in once a week. He's in cyber, sort of very digitally native. His boss is overseas. So what's the point of going to the office? They go into the office when the boss is in town, they're doing training, they're, really needing to collaborate on a project, they're starting off in trouble, whatever it is. My daughter has a team that is all over Australia. There's no point coming into the office. But I just want to make sure we're conscious that, here I am as a leader making these decisions. We've got a cohort of people that's coming through our workforce that are very digitally enabled and they're very comfortable online. So, I have people saying to me, oh no, but they need to be in the office so they can have the water cooler conversation. My kids didn't know what a water cooler was. My son has pretty much, his water cooler it's a chat on his screen that basically his entire team is on. And whether somebody has a problem, they stick it on the chat and everyone scrums in, there's your solution. That's how they're solving problems now. So I just want to make sure that we're not biasing it to how we led and how we were successful as leaders in the org. And this is how we led in the past, because the environment and the workforce we've got coming through is also quite different. The last thing I want to make an interesting observation. I wonder, Nick, just with that, sort of 20, or I would say a third of people who wants to be fully in the office, a third of people who don't want to be in the office at all. I always talked about the fact that for the first time, the introverts were really happy. They had an ability to get away from people so they could work from home. And if we want the best from people, give them the choice and that flexibility to choose how they are going to be more productive for you, rather than treat them like a 10-year-old and let me tell you how you're going to work for me.
Totally.
Absolutely.
We actually did surveys on what people think is best for their physical and mental health. I was going to relate that to the right to disconnect. What you find is people are happiest when they're working from home the number of days that they want. So look, if you want to go in every day because your apartment's tiny, you feel it's more social and you feel like you're progressing, you should do that. And that kind of comes back. It's hard, though, to give choice to a team. It's like if you have a team of 10 people to say 2 of you come in every day, 5 hybrid and 3, well, probably my maths is wrong. That probably adds up to, I'm not sure it adds up to 10. But yeah, if you have a team, you're going to find the folks that are coming in every day in the team tend to get connected and get on, which is why you want to have, consistency and coordination within teams and firms. But over time, as long as you stick with that plan, you'll find that people are sorted and sorted out. Yeah. So I think the main thing is there is a huge variety. It's like air conditioning, or I don't know, favorite football team or something. There's no one size fits all. And so as long as you stick with it as a company and say we're hybrid or we're in 1 day a week, over time your employees are going to adjust and you'll have people that are happy.
Yeah. So I can tell you, I think if I collate what all of my organizations are doing, they're making clear what the flexible arrangements are. They're making clear what the team collaboration and coordination requirements are. So there's an element that even if you want to just be wholly at home, you have an obligation to your team and the effectiveness of that team to make sure that you should be able to come in when you're actually scrumming on whatever it is you're doing. We're making sure that technology is really seamless, because having to log in and going through 10 different sort of hurdles to get into your office from home isn't helpful, just as much as if I've logged in from home, oh my God, I've got to do something funny when I get to work. That's not helpful. The one thing I'd encourage everyone to do is make sure you get data of what your people are doing and what they're wanting to do, and then using that actually to make decisions, rather than using some of our biases, and this is how we've done things in the past, to actually make some of these decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of data, Nick, I know you've got data on this question. There's quite a few people asking about the impact of work from home on promotions. Can you speak to the evidence on that? Particularly, some people are asking, what's the evidence in terms of, you've got this middle career workers who don't want to come in so much. Are they likely to be overlooked for promotion? Can you speak to the promotion question? I know you've got some good evidence on this.
Yeah, sure. So one thing you can say, and we've done 3 randomized control trials, is that if you're in an organization or a team where, say, others are coming in 4 or 5 days a week and you're working from home and 3-4 days and coming in far less than others, you will fall behind. So for example, I did a different randomized control trial where we had half of people came in all 5 days and the other half came in just 1 day a week, and you saw the second group, they were randomized into it, but their promotion rates are half the first group. So what's going on? They're getting ignored. It's basically prejudice. There's a bias against them, they're forgotten about. 2, there were some other issues that in this randomized control trial, some of the development you're getting was coming in and being involved in conversations and taking part of training. So you don't probably, if you're looking to get promoted, want to be very different from others in the organization you're in. The second point, though, is if you're in an organization where everyone, say, is working from home 4 days a week, like Airbnb, and you're also doing the same thing, you're probably fine. So it does not appear to be a promotion discount if you're doing the same as the rest of the organization. There does appear to be a promotion problem if you're an outlier. So if you want to work from home 4 days a week and come in 1, find an organization or a team that's offering that and you're on the same cadence as everyone else, then you don't seem to suffer.
Melissa, can I just add one thing on this?
Please.
Because we've had this is the capitalist decision, right? This is all about profitability of our organizations, and wearing my very capitalist hat. If you do not know as a leader how to lead in hybrid, then maybe you are not the leader for the organizations of the future. Do you know what I mean? Like, if I think about where we're going to be in 2030, and we've got AI disruption, climate disruption, there's social disruption, there's health disruptions that are coming through. If you haven't actually learned how to lead hybrid, then maybe you're not a leader for us. Because I really need that agility. I need leaders who can adapt and change and get the best out of their people.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Ming. We've probably got time for one last question. And the most voted question that is still on the list here is about the data. And, Andrew Weir again says office occupancy has never been at 100%. How confident are we with the pre-COVID baseline work from home data? I can say something about the Australian data that there's a number of sources of data on this. We've got the ABS Annual Working Arrangements Survey, we've got the census, we've got HILDA. Some of those data sources we do think overstate the amount of work from home pre-pandemic, mainly because they include things like farm workers who are working on their property at home. So when you include things like that, it looks like it's about 10%-ish pre-pandemic. We think a more reasonable estimate from the available data sources is 5 or 6% pre-pandemic. And the HILDA survey is a great source for that because you can see specifically what occupations people are in and whether they're likely to be in working from home occupations as well. Any other comments on the jump from pre-COVID to post-COVID working from home?
So on office occupancy, yeah, that's right. I mean, even pre-pandemic numbers were normally 70% of desks are filled on any given workday. So what's the other 30%? They're sick, they're traveling, the person's left, there's an empty desk. So this data I showed you, they benchmarked either against actually February 2020 or weirdly February 2019. So yes, I mean, the nice thing is the cell phone data lines up almost exactly with the swipe data. So I think I kind of trust it. It looks like office footfall is about 60% of pre-pandemic levels. Now, weirdly enough, that isn't the disaster you'd think it would be for office space. I mean, the office space is kind of suffering. We know that it's not doing great. But it turns out that those 3 days tend to be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And it's actually very hard to share offices. So most offices are, doing okay. I wouldn't say they're doing great. Actually, what's suffering more is like sandwich shops and stuff roundabouts. So someone asked about that earlier. There has been a shift. Depends whether you think this is bad or not. Those jobs have moved out to the suburbs. So it's not like sandwich shops have gone away. I kind of think, to be quite honest, living out in San Francisco, some of this is good. Why? Because in 2019, there was enormous concerns over cities becoming eye-wateringly expensive. And folks on like frontline jobs, take fire or police or nurses, they've got to go in every day. And in 2019, they could not afford to live in the center or anywhere near the center of cities. Because a lot of people have moved out, it's left a bit of space and some of those folks can move back in. So yes, city centers have kind of become a bit less dense, but it's not obviously bad, actually, the fact they're less expensive, unless you happen to own a lot of property. So if you bought a lot of city center property, yes, you definitely have lost. And, that's one group that's clearly lost out. But if you bought property in the suburbs, actually, they've done very well. So suburban property's done great. So I'll stop there, but it's less clear it's good or bad, but it is pretty clear what the direction of travel has been.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to squeeze in one very last one. Ming, I think this is probably for you. The question is around insurance and the impact of work from home on liability and insurance, especially workers' compensation. You've probably got a minute to succinctly answer that question.
Well, all I would say is that we haven't seen a massive uptick in sort of work from home sort of accidents, because I think mostly people are sensible in terms of how they set things up. And also organisations themselves are also asking and ensuring that organisations or our employees are setting themselves up properly at home. Some of the things, if anything, I'm watching on is making sure that the mental health stuff stays, fairly stable, but generally in Australia we're seeing mental health issues sort of go up as an issue for workplaces. I don't think that's necessarily connected to work from home or work in the office. It's just more generally for people. So I think from a workers' comp perspective, I think people have largely been very sensible.
Thanks, Ming. We're going to have to leave it there today, everybody. We knew this would happen, that we'd have such a fast conversation and so many questions that we couldn't get to. But thanks, everybody, so much. On behalf of CEDA and everyone here today, I'd like to particularly thank our speakers, Nick Bloom and Ming Long. Thank you. It's been a really insightful discussion, and we've covered a lot of ground, and we really appreciate your candor and your time on this critical and evolving issue today. Thank you to everyone on the call for your participation as well. As we mentioned, everyone on the call today will receive an email with the link to the recording of today's discussion. We'll also include the slides from Nick Bloom's presentation and our link to our CEDA research that will be published tomorrow on Work From Home. So we'll have that all ready for you soon. And as always, you can keep up to date with our full program and register for upcoming events on the CEDA website. We have several major events coming up around the country. On the 1st of May, we've got the Climate and Energy Summit in Melbourne. And then in June, on the 13th, we're heading to Sydney for the Human Cities Summit. And then, of course, our flagship State of the Nation event in the capital, Canberra, on the 3rd of September this year. And we've got the full program of state-based and virtual events, of course, as well. So do check the CEDA website for those details. That brings us to a close. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.